Let me introduce Lindsay Hooper, who is the interim CEO for the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, which is a globally recognized institute dedicating to activating leadership to transform world economies for people, nature, and climate. Lindsay has over 20 years' experience at the forefront of business and sustainability, challenging and inspiring senior leaders from multinational businesses, financial institutions, and influential organizations. She has led significant growth and innovation at the CISL, shaping it into a respected international institute. She has built strategies and structures vital for organizational success and set to elevate CISL further amid global demands for systemic change, accelerating progress towards a sustainable economy. So, yes, a very exciting keynote that we have. So please, let's welcome Lindsay Hooper. And I will stop sharing. There we go. Hello.
Thank you very much. And hopefully you can now see my screen. It's a real pleasure to be here. I know that the institution has long played a leadership role on sustainability, so it's a real privilege to be invited to speak to you today. Thank you. So I've been invited to speak to this topic, clearly a really important topic. We urgently need to get beyond talk to real substantive action at scale. And to start with, I want to very briefly acknowledge what greenwash is. I'm assuming that you're all very familiar with the concept and its challenges, but broadly speaking, it's communications, it's claims that create an impression that an organization or a project is more sustainable than it is in reality. Sometimes that is done intentionally with a deliberate intent to mislead and misrepresent. Being charitable, sometimes it's also done naively because of misunderstandings, lack of clarity, lack of confidence. But regardless of motives, it's problematic. It really erodes trust and it risks masking problems and delaying progress. So it's something that we really need to address. And I wanted to start by taking a long view. Why do we even have greenwash? Why is greenwash even a thing? And thought it could be helpful to take stock, recognize the journey that businesses and professionals have been on in relation to sustainability. When I started out 20 years ago, our challenge as an institution was to persuade businesses, to persuade professionals that they should be concerned about environmental challenges and social challenges, to persuade them that that was relevant to them and not just a job for government. We then had a breakthrough with the Paris Climate Agreement, and there was a level of confidence, of optimism that the world leaders had a plan, that governments would be taking action. And we saw a lot of pledges, a lot of institutional pledges, a lot of long-term commitments, a lot of, I suppose, confidence that we would get enabling regulation and that businesses should start preparing in anticipation of that. But there weren't delivery plans. So it's a lot of long-term commitments in a sense that probably we were now getting serious and were starting to move. We also then had a lot of stakeholder pressure. We had student protest, wider civil society protest, investors taking an interest, customers starting to take an interest. And we had a whole rise of engagement, reporting, demands for transparency, communication on the part of businesses to talk about, wanting to talk about and respond to that pressure and demand and to talk about what they were doing. Over recent years, we've had what I think of as the ESG boom, when investors started to get interested and felt that perhaps the world was starting to move, that was opportunity inherent in investing in activities that were more sustainable. But a lot of that was focused on win-wins, opportunities to achieve financial returns by financing more sustainable activity. But underpinning this, still not really substantive joined up delivery plans and not yet the underlying structures that really would enable progress. And over the last year, because we've had an absence of both of those things, as we've seen economic headwinds, cost of living, inflationary pressures, we've seen conflicts and geopolitical tensions. We've seen that some of perhaps the ambitions around the hype around ESG couldn't be delivered on. And then we've seen a bit of a road bump and market sentiment has stepped down and makes it really challenging at the moment to move forward. So when we look at the space that businesses and professionals are in now, it's not surprising then that we see greenwash emerging, because I think people are between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we have the underlying drivers of climate change and nature and societal expectations. We have increasing regulation around disclosures, but without it being priced in, without the enabling market structures, without good understanding and demand on client sides, and without good joined up strategies at national and regional levels, we aren't really able, we don't have the conditions to enable us to reconcile profitability and sustainability. But we do have a lot more rigor on the financial side, on a lot more rigor around costs and profitability and accounting systems. So in this squeeze, it's not surprising that given the lack of rigor that we've had around sustainability, that there's been pressure for organizations to make bigger claims than they can really evidence around sustainability. And there's been a pattern of overstating performance in that context. The scope for that, the scope for greenwash is really narrowing, and I know there's a big focus on that today, and regulation is increasingly part of the solution. A whole lot of either directly targeting greenwash or really embedding wider accounting and impacts into industry standards. But more is going to be needed in the short term. That regulation, we hope, will deliver what's needed. But there are professional responsibilities to close that gap and to withstand the pressure to keep telling good news stories, basically. Not to do so will be damaging to organizations. It will erode trust in the profession as a whole. It really risks really delaying progress. It will give a false perception that actually we're on track when we're really not. It will store up costs and risks for the future, and it will really hold back the substantive progress that we need to see. So when we then look at what is needed and how we can get upstream of and address some of those structural challenges that are the causes of greenwash, institutionally, we're focused on these 5 areas. So at the center of this, fundamentally aligning commercial, economic, policy decision-making with sustainability has to be where we ultimately get to. We need to move beyond this being trade-offs between doing what the world needs and delivering against budgets and financial performance. But in order to get to that position, we're going to need to make some structural changes and work in different ways. And on the one side of this slide, points 2 and 3, we won't make progress if we don't get political support and we don't get societal buy-in. We know that infrastructure is really highly politicized. We're going to need engagement and buy-in right across the political spectrum and societies. We need to engage with issues of jobs, of costs, of economic and regional development. On the other hand, on the other side here, we know that place matters. We know we need to work right across value chains. We know that we're going to need innovation, engagement, and joined up decision-making. We need well-informed, joined up decision-making across places and across supply chains. And we know that structural engineers are really uniquely positioned in this area to both demand and implement innovation, to really drive change in the built environment, both for new construction, but also the retrofitting that we're going to need in developed economies. But what can individuals and their organizations do within this? So I have a range of areas where we institutionally think that more progress is needed. And the first of those relates to mindset shifts. So a shift in mindset to challenge ourselves to make sure, and this relates to one of those polls there, to make sure that we have confidence in the decisions that we're making as professionals, that we're driven not by sustainability rankings and compliance. It's important we are compliant, but we also need to be driven by an understanding of the real costs, real dependencies, and real impacts across climate, nature, and people, so that our decisions, our recommendations and advice are focused on what's most material and not always just on what might be trending or what's most popular. There's also an important mindset around thinking in systems, not just in silos or not just in projects. So thinking across whole value chains, across regional contexts and a range of different stakeholders there, and of course, across time, to consider that total risk and total impact, not just for yourself, but for others, so that we don't risk displacing emissions. So we're all good, but actually they've just moved on to someone else's balance sheet. And really important to think about optimizing for multiple outcomes. There are actions we could take that will be great for climate, but terrible for biodiversity. So if we're going to make sustainability claims, we need to make sure that they're good for sustainability in the round, not just good for our reputation within it, and good for multiple outcomes. And I recognise, and we're working with Department of Engineering, particularly around this, that engineers are perhaps uniquely positioned to manage and model the different trade-offs to deliver for multiple outcomes, so that we're delivering not only within a budget envelope for climate outcomes for nature and for people, but also important to recognise that not every challenge will have a neat solution. Sometimes the mindset is one of making progress and having the best and best informed outcome in a context of complexity. And a third mindset shift is to really challenge that pressure to always be telling the good news stories in the PR, and to be recognized that leadership and professionalism about real transparency, real honesty, and to acknowledge where we don't have the answers, because we don't always have the answers, but to be proactive in finding out what the answers are, where we do have gaps, or we're having to make leaps of faith or make assumptions. The next really important piece to get upstream and to get support for the big changes we're going to need is the importance of contributing to a better vision for the future. At the moment, and particularly in Europe, we have a lot of fear of change, a lot of fear of loss of jobs, a lot of loss of lifestyles, of disruption, a lot of harking back to getting back to how things were in the past. If we're going to get buy-in for really fundamental shifts, for big investments that are disruptive, that are expensive, we're going to need businesses and professionals to contribute to visions that speak to citizens and aspirations, real lives, that contribute to jobs and economies and quality of life. And that needs to encompass industrial strategies and economic strategies and regional development strategies, and to situate infrastructure within that. We also need buy-in to those visions. These need to be not just businesses or sectoral visions. We need real buy-in. So a lot of my work has been in the mining sector, where there needed to be, to get support for big infrastructure, need for that shared buy-in across trade unions and communities and local government, so that when things get challenging, as they will, everyone is bought into the why we're doing this and is supportive of progress. But I think also the need for a more positive vision sometimes within organizations. This can be really hard. It's really hard to kind of be a hero and get a quick win. And it can be seen as just really costly and burdensome. We've got a real opportunity to reframe that, to see this as a great opportunity for innovation and creativity. The Paul Hawken quote that you might be familiar with is a great inspiration. That what a great time to be alive. This is a generation that gets to completely change the world. So how do we channel that kind of vision and enthusiasm? Obviously, when we talk about greenwash, there's communication has a critical role to play. And I think generally across sustainability, there's been a challenge that we've talked too much about doing the right thing and too much focus on reputation, and about trying to please stakeholders, and not enough focus on long-term value and resilience. So an important responsibility to focus on and to use language to talk to long-term value in a wider sense, not just financial value, value for society and for resilience. The built environment, as you know, is the place where the decisions we make today are going to lock in our outcomes for our long-term futures. And we need those decisions to stand the test of time in economic terms as well as environmental terms. So we need to be bringing forward those inevitable direct impacts of climate and nature challenges, as well as anticipating inevitable future market shifts and regulation. And we recognize that clients, decision makers are not always factoring those things in now, and it can be really challenging, but there's a need for professionals to be highlighting that, to be bringing those to the table as part of discussions in terms that are relevant to long-term value, to liabilities, to resilience, and to get upstream of some of these challenges where there is a tension, to try to address them with root cause. So through regulation, and I know the institution is very active here, but also that demonstration of what's possible, to try to tilt some of the market sentiment and dynamics there. Oops. There's also a need to work and innovate with others. There is a need for greater regulation, but there's a lot that can be done through collaboration with others, particularly to address where we still lack credible delivery plans. We're still in a space where we have targets, but not really a lot of clarity about how we're going to get there. And so we'll keep getting fragmented incremental change. There are some really challenging sectors and systems where it's impossible for any single organization to innovate and make progress alone. We're going to need step change progress, and that's going to require shared ambition, shared strategies about major innovations, major infrastructure choices across transport and energy and buildings. One of the big projects that we're excited about in the Institute is our work with engineering around aviation, which is precisely focused on this challenge, a really challenging sector. We need aligned infrastructure and innovation. We brought together best-in-class expertise across the system to work together to identify where those step change solutions are, to bring real rigor and modeling to the innovations that are being explored, to inform innovation, R&D strategies, investment strategies and government policies. And I think there's real potential for more of that across more sectors. And I think also an important an openness to work in new ways, to be more active in the pre-competitive space, to be exploring, innovating, championing greater ambition with peers, to go beyond the brief and to understand how you can influence before it crystallizes into a brief, to start influencing what it is that we're going to need. Oops. We also need really good governance. A lot of challenges are being fought in the governance space at the moment. In institutions that are publicly listed, there's a real need to make sure that corporate governance isn't compelling organizations to have to deliver only to the short-term needs of shareholders rather than the long-term interests of organizations, and to make sure that their board directors are really well equipped to navigate a really complex field, new liabilities, and to be able to navigate those tensions between long-term sustainability and short-term commerciality. But there's also a need for really good sectoral, regional, market governance. So we've got the conditions for necessary cooperation, so we can raise standards and have a race to the top rather than the bottom. But important that there's real transparency, honesty, participatory processes as part of this building trust after an era where people have lost confidence because of greenwash. That needs to be rebuilt. So we need greater engagement at the governance level, and to make sure that we're protecting against delays that are favouring vested interests at the expense of societies. We know governance can be a real unlock at a project level too. Our own sustainable retrofit here at Entopia in Cambridge, it was not tech innovation, that it was process innovation and governance innovation. It was the fact we had a project charter that everybody signed up to that unlocked the collaboration and enabled us to deliver a sustainable retrofit within the same cost envelope as a standard retrofit. That was a governance intervention and innovation, not a technical one. We also need greater capability and skills at all levels. And it was interesting to see the poll on levels of confidence at the moment. And in some ways that links to capability and skills. We know that survey after survey tells us that organizations lack the necessary capabilities and skills to be able to drive and navigate transition. Some of that are technical capabilities, but some of it is just good understanding about what good looks like. And part of that is the reason why we see greenwash. There's just not enough understanding of really what good enough looks like. In other cases, the challenges are not technical. We might know what good looks like, but it's about the ability to think in systems, to move forward in contexts of complexity, where you've got very different and competing agendas. The ability to build momentum, to inspire and influence others, to build collaborations, to be able to be innovative. And the development of those kinds of capabilities alongside the technical capabilities are really core to much of the work that we do in education at Cambridge, including with our master's programme on the built environment. The really important point right now, because our challenge is really one of speed, of urgency. We will eventually get transition. The question is, how quickly will it happen, and at what cost? So we really need to be speaking up in support of really ambitious action. And this is speaking up also to tell the truth about the hard realities and the choices ahead. No politicians who are trying to get voted who think that sustainability is vote losing are not in a position to be able to tell the truth. People with a vested interest in today's business models are not incentivized to speak up. But as professionals, we have a responsibility to tell the truth about the reality of the hard choices, combined with a very positive vision of where we need to get to, and to be supportive of bold action, market incentives, enabling regulation. We won't get any of that without strong voice from the private sector, speaking up to say that action on sustainability is good for business, it's good for economies, it's good for societies, it's good for jobs, and leaning in to support those that are trying to make progress. Again, our work at the Institute, we do a lot of work with leading businesses, speaking up in support of strong government ambition and to try to stop the rollback of ambition in light of some of those headwinds I referred to earlier. I think there's a real professional responsibility to lobby for change, not just through, and realize the institution has been very effective here, but we all have our own spheres of influence. We have our own, groups that we're working with and networks, a responsibility to think about how are we using our voice wherever we have a seat at the table. And finally, I conclude by saying that this is really a leadership challenge that we're currently facing. And we recognize that right now, across society, across sectors, we've seen a real deficit of leadership on sustainability. In fact, we ourselves, there's a picture from a leadership summit that we convened in February, because we recognize that sustainability issues were starting to drop down sustainability agendas at a point when they really should be at the top of leadership agendas. And that what's needed right now, more than anything, is really vocal, resilient, committed professional leadership. Recognizing now, even though it's challenging, that's precisely the time to step up and not step back. And we know there's a particular responsibility for those who hold positions of power and influence in society, but we all, as professionals, can make a difference, can have an impact, and have a responsibility to speak up and lead change. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was very informative, and I don't think I've ever heard greenwashing described so eloquently. So thank you very much for that. You're getting a lot of applause as well, which is good. I have one question, which is how can I know that you have sort of encouraged people on this call and also others to really sort of speak up and use their own volition to really push for change. But sometimes we can not feel empowered in that. And I was wondering if you had any comments or thoughts or advice for individuals to be able to act with leadership when maybe not empowered with decision-making authority in this area.
So I think if we look back at the people who've been most effective in catalyzing change on sustainability, nobody gave them a mandate and said, please go catalyze change. So I'd say if we just look at the lessons from history, who's been influential? It's people that just took the opportunities available to them to take action. Obviously, if you have resources, if you have decision-making power, it becomes easier. But there are people who've catalyzed change in the world without having that. So I think, first of all, you don't necessarily need a mandate to be able to take change, to have change. I think it starts, though, by being very clear about what you want to achieve in quite a specific sense. Pinning down, you want to make positive progress, but what particular outcomes, being very clear about your purpose and goals and what you want to achieve, rather than just broadly making a positive contribution. And then I think it's being clear-sighted about where's the window of opportunity. Who do you need to change? What do you need to change? And where's the likely opportunity for that to happen? Is there an upcoming consultation period? Is the brief not yet crystallized? Looking at what leverage you've got. Is it your expertise? Is it your network? Is it evidence? What is it that you can bring to the table? Is it, a strong voice of integrity and professionalism? So being clear about what you're bringing to that. Having allies, working out, who else can you bring along as part of this? A recognition that although there are big goals we need to get to, we can bank small wins. We can create a sense of momentum and progress, which in itself is then compelling and attractive. But I think there's also a really important role of communication and influence, and really understanding the priorities and agendas of the people that we're seeking to influence. A lot of my work has been at corporate board levels and just really understanding the big decisions across the table, the pressures that they're sitting with, so that, we're not saying you must, and of course they recognize they must, but really understanding what is it that they're holding and need to deliver on in order that we can make sure that messages really are influential and speaking to their reality.
Wow, thank you very much. A lot of food for thought there. We do also have another question. which is from Daniel Rodrigo Davies. And they ask, what do you mean by we will eventually get transition? And what is your vision of transition?
So I think what I mean, we will get transition. You can't do business on a dead planet. Fundamentally, the planet will not sustain the way that we're currently operating on it. The laws of nature simply won't sustain it, and we will see more and more signals and backlash from planetary limits as we increasingly cross those thresholds. So by definition, we won't carry on as we are. We also know that the combination of tech innovation and market forces is incredibly powerful. If there are better, cheaper, cleaner ways of doing it, even if it's not politically acceptable, ultimately that will happen. It's almost impossible, history tells us, to stand in the face of that tech innovation and market forces. So transition is inevitable to ways of working that are that we can sustain within the limits of a finite planet. The vision for what that would look like, optimistically, and we have to be optimistic, there's a narrow window of opportunity. I think that we're starting to get serious. I think a lot of the backlash is because we're starting to get into an era of costs and consequences and moving beyond greenwash to get serious and recognize the big gaps, the big challenges. We have a window of opportunity to get serious and mitigate the worst possible. We looked into some negative impacts, but to get to a place where we start to cost things in and we start to be able to align economic activity with positive outcomes for society. So a positive vision was we have the least possible damage to humanity and the planet, and we get to reconcile economic activity with social benefits. There's a more negative vision if we don't achieve that, which is obviously more challenging for humanity.
Thank you so much. I'm so sad we only had less than half an hour to hear you speak, but thank you so much for such an inspirational keynote.